all the I statements in the world, all the active
Uh-huh.
listening in the world will not hide the fact if somebody has contempt for you.
Hello, and welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with your podcast host Keegan, and this is your podcast for all mental health, addiction, recovery issues, and topics. And I've got some questions for you today. First of all, be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That's a 7-word formula Dr. Bruce Chalmer offers couples in crisis, and it's deceptively simple. But what happens when kindness feels impossible? When panic takes the wheel, and when faith, whatever that means, is nowhere to be found. So let's dive into the heart of what it really takes to love deeply and last long. So Dr. Bruce, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thanks for having me on. You're already asking some really interesting questions. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Fair enough. Thank you for just being on the show, and thank you for doing what you do for other people out there. Because working with couples is not really easy, right? Because you kind of got to deal with your own couple stuff too, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. If you ask a bunch of therapists, it seems like therapists kind of break into more or less two camps, which is the people who say, "Oh my God, I would never go near couples," and then the people who say, "I just love working with couples." I, of course, am in the latter camp. I really enjoy working with couples. It's not easy, but working with individuals isn't easy either. I mean, you're working with folks, and it's a great privilege to be invited into somebody's life that way, and they're looking for you to help them, and my God, we're all doing the best we can,
Yeah.
But working with couples, there's something about it that I have just found. I mean, I've been doing it for 30 years, and the last, I don't know, 10 or 12 at least, I've been focusing almost exclusively on couples for new folks.
Okay.
And really enjoying that. There's something so compelling about the work and so inspiring about the work. People are working through some really hard stuff. It has really big ramifications for their lives, and whether they stay together or not, I'm often inspired by the heart and soul they put into it. So I enjoy the work.
For sure. And that's really good that you do. And for some reason, whenever you first started going off, it had me ask the question, like, does a couples therapist need a couples therapist like a dentist needs another dentist? Like, you can't really work on your own stuff, can you?
Well, of course not. No, yes. I mean, if one is in a situation, and I have been. I mean, I don't mind saying a bit about my background. I'm in a second marriage. We've been married for 21 years now.
Okay.
And the very short story of my first marriage was that both my ex and I have gone on to marry really wonderful women, and we're both a lot happier.
Huh.
That's how that turned out. She figured out that she wanted to be married, but not to a man. She wanted to be married to a woman.
That's fair.
And I did not qualify. And I make that sound easy, and it wasn't. It was really painful. And we did have therapy. And I was already working as a therapist during the tail end of that marriage.
Yeah.
And therapists need therapists too. And indeed. And no, of course we can't. It's funny. I can't be a therapist with my own family, though it's still me. It's still the real me. When I'm working with clients, when I'm talking to my family, it's still the same me. It's a very different kind of relationship, of course, but it's, the insights I've gained from working with other couples, I apply in my own life as well, and vice versa.
Okay. And whenever you were talking about how some therapists go towards the realm of, I'll never work with couples, and you're right there saying you love it, I think if I had to guess, it would probably be because you're actually helping make and mold a new relationship or a new life, if you will. Well, does that make sense? Like, while while other people work with individuals, you're working with a team that's already working towards another goal. So it's like there's more people working towards the same goal, which I think is
that's interesting.
Cool.
That is, it's an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't quite thought of it that way. I mean, even working with an individual, you're sort of inviting someone to sort of shape themselves, and it's interesting. When I was working, and I have over the years, I did a lot of work with individuals, and I think one of the reasons that the transition into mostly couples was relatively straightforward for me was even when I was working with individuals, I felt a loyalty to a greater system. Do you know what I mean? Of course, I feel loyalty to the person I'm working with, but I also felt loyalty to their partners and families and kids and, whatever, that it just feels like, no, we're all in this together,
Yeah.
So to work with even working with an individual, I was sort of doing couples work sometimes, even if I didn't know the other person. And so
Yeah.
for me, it was a pretty quick transition. And there are individual therapists. It's funny, I was just writing about this. A guy named Bill Doherty, who you
Okay.
may have heard of in another context. He's one of the
Hmm.
founders of a group called Braver Angels. Have you heard of them? I love giving them a
Mm-mm.
shout out.
I have not.
They're they're an organization that was started in 2016.
Okay.
Not coincidentally, not it wasn't merely coincidence that that was during Trump's first campaign, because
Mm.
things got so polarized politically in this country. And
Mm-hmm.
Braver Angels is an organization devoted to getting people talking across the polarization gap.
Ooh.
So they have people, they're kind of whimsical. They have people who are red and blue, and purple,
Uh-huh.
red, blue, and purple. And that they realize most of us aren't all one or the other,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
and they facilitate conversations. Well, Bill Doherty is one of the co-founders of that organization.
Okay.
And I had heard of him. I've never met him personally, but I'd heard of him
Mm-hmm.
as a couples therapist, because he's pretty well known in the couples therapy world. He's done a lot of
Uh-huh.
writing about that. And one of the things he has pointed out, he's
Mm-hmm.
done research with some other folks, and he's found that being in individual therapy is
Mm-hmm.
often dangerous for a marriage.
Ooh.
Yeah, because, and I so relate to this, having been an individual
Yeah.
therapist myself.
Uh-huh.
You of course you sympathize and empathize with the person who you're sitting with,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes, and he did some research on how often this happens and found it happens a lot.
Yeah.
Therapists will make comments or disparaging comments about a spouse they've never met,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of undermine the relationship.
Yeah.
And they mean well, but they will
Mm-hmm.
often do it that way. And so that's another interesting thing. I do tend. It's funny. Obviously, even monogamy isn't for everyone.
Yeah.
I'm not cynical about it, but if you look and see, there are some folks that just don't seem to want to do it that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
have respect for the folks who are trying some newer models, various forms
Oh
of
yeah.
polyamory and ethical non-monogamy and all that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
I have to say, as a this is a little bit of my statistical background. Before I was a psychologist, I was a statistician. My
Ooh.
statistical head tells me I don't have a random sample of people. I have a biased sample of people, which is to say, nobody ever makes an appointment with me just to tell me how well everything is going.
Is it true?
So when I hear about polyamory or ethical non-monogamy, I only hear about it when it's a shit show.
Yeah.
I don't get to
Yeah.
hear about it when it's going well. So, I have a bit of a jaundiced view about it. But,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm, that's not, in my own life, I like being married. I mean, I like
Mm-hmm.
monogamy and I like being married,
Uh-huh.
especially when it's going well, which,
Yeah.
I like being in a marriage that works well a lot better than I did being in one that wasn't. Although
Mm-hmm.
even then I like being married, so I'm kind of the marrying kind.
Yeah.
But all of that by way of saying, that phenomenon of people sometimes saying, undermining marriages or undermining monogamous relationships is
Mm-hmm.
often because they don't like them themselves.
Yeah.
So
Ooh.
a lot of even some couples therapists will just say, well, if you're not happy, split up. They'll sort of say splitting up as a first resort, and for me, it tends to be a last resort.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad that you have that as the last resort, because why would you want that for the first resort in the first place? Like,
Yeah.
that just doesn't sound like that would be like going to the doctor and saying like, "Hey, I've got like a cramp in my hand that won't go away," and they say, "All right, just amputate it."
Yeah, cut it
Like,
off, right? Exactly. Yeah.
it's like, no, that's not the point. Like, this is part of me, and I'm wanting it to be better. Like, even if it has to have some work done to it. And that's really interesting. I want to make 2 points real quick. One, Bill Doherty. Is that it?
Doherty.
Doherty.
Doherty, but I think it's pronounced Doherty.
Okay, that's really interesting that they are sitting there doing that for really the country, helping do that, because and who else better than to bridge the political gap right there than a couples therapist themselves?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it wasn't. Didn't when I found out, because I said I'd heard of him before. When I
Uh-huh.
found out he was one of the co-founders of Braver Angels, I wasn't surprised. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of fits. Yeah.
Yeah, that for sure. And oh man, that is really shocking almost, hearing that people getting individual therapy while they're in a relationship can actually be detrimental in a sense. And that does make some sense, because individual therapy is a form of reclaiming sovereignty or reclaiming personal power
Yeah.
in a sense. And if you're helping someone build their own, then you're not cultivating the rest of their life. And so you already felt that pull to the rest of their world before you started working with couples in that sense. So how did you get to that area? Like, what pulled you to work with couples?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. Beats the shit out of me. I don't, I don't know. It's hard to explain, why do I like chocolate and I don't like olives, which is kind of
Oh
weird. I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
I can't figure it out. My wife, loves cheese and loves cake,
Mhm.
but doesn't like cheesecake. I mean, go figure. I mean, it's almost like that. It's almost as
Yeah.
silly as that. It's like, I don't know.
Okay.
It just seems to be how I'm wired or something.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I love the feeling of repairing, repairing relationships if I can.
Mhm.
Or again, sometimes repairing means splitting up, and that's a
Yeah.
repair for some folks.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
do want to know, just, lest I don't want to imply that individual therapy is always a bad idea for
Oh
people
yeah,
in a
no.
couple, because it's not. Often it's really important.
Mhm.
And I know this goes to what you talk about a lot.
Mhm.
Certainly when you're talking about substance issues, when you're talking
Yeah.
about somebody who's, needs to be in recovery or is in recovery,
Mhm.
the individual work they get, or like if they're in AA or something like that, the participation they do by themselves is super important to their
Oh yeah.
relationship as well. So it's not like it's either one or the other.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you for pointing that out because it is also kind of in line with the whole if you get homework, you have to do the homework. You can't just sit there and say like, "Oh yeah, I went and saw so and so and they just said I'm doing good." And that's it.
Yeah.
But really, let's see. How would you actually say that some people find that there's a problem that they can't fix and that they need the outside help? Because a lot of the time we're sitting there in relationships and we kind of go like, "Ah, this worked before, it should work again," right? But that doesn't always seem to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah, what tends to happen, and this, I will tell this story in a very gendered way because it tends to be gendered in a particular direction.
Okay.
Yeah, I've met plenty of exceptions.
Yeah, yeah.
The vast majority, not everybody. I've worked with some gay couples, but mostly I work with heterosexual couples.
Mhm.
So man and woman,
Uh-huh.
and it is. I don't want to throw in 90%, which is what somebody says when they don't know how much it is, but it's a lot, But
Yeah.
90%, a lot, most of the time, it
Okay.
is a woman. It's either the woman who's actually making the appointment,
Mhm.
or a man's doing it because a woman told him, if you don't, we're in trouble.
Mm,
So, and usually, in other words, women want to do it way before men do.
gotcha.
And there's all kinds of good, I think, even evolutionary reasons why I think that's true.
Mhm.
Women are much more oriented, not only women are much more oriented to sort of diagnosing a relationship, you know what I mean? They're
Mhm.
they're much more conscious. They have way more language for it than most men
Uh-huh.
do.
Yeah.
And they like talking about it.
Mhm.
And also women are willing to ask for directions. I mean,
Yeah.
that classic, that funny, stereotype, but there's truth to
Uh-huh.
it.
Yeah.
We as men tend not to want to do that. And again,
Mhm.
I'm not knocking men or women in that. It's
Mhm.
like, yeah, those differences have a basis, probably in evolution. Who knows? There's
Yeah.
we're kind of wired that way.
Yeah,
Again,
yeah.
there's exceptions, but we're kind of wired that way.
Mhm.
So it's usually a woman that wants to do it. I actually have a chapter in one of my books. In fact, it's going to be a chapter in the book I'm working on now, specifically the one I did previously, specifically for women,
Mhm.
entitled "How to Get Your Reluctant Guy to Go to Couples Therapy with You." And what I base it on,
Uh-huh.
and I think it's an important way of looking at it. I'm not
Mhm.
knocking guys. I'm not saying, oh, we're idiots because we don't want to go.
Yeah.
I'm saying no. For the reason a woman often has a hard time convincing the guy is that
Mhm.
she will conclude, first of all, she will conclude that he doesn't care enough to go, and
Yeah.
and we men tend to collude with that because we'll be telling her things like, well, you're the one with the problem, so you go. And
Yeah.
I'm fine. You're the one who's not happy. Which
Mhm.
tends not to work very well.
No.
But really, if you look at it, I think for the most guys who are resisting it, we're
Mhm.
resisting it because we're terrified. We're
Oh,
not
yeah.
resisting it because we don't care. We're resisting it
Mhm.
because we're afraid what will happen. And my point to the women trying to get the guy to go is, he might listen to you if you recognize his fears are justified.
Mhm.
He's not
Oh,
crazy to be afraid.
yeah.
He might actually listen to you if he picks up from you. You're saying, you know what? I see why you're afraid to go. I see what you're risking,
Mhm.
because indeed you're afraid the therapist will take my side, which a lot of therapists do. Frankly, it sucks, but it's true.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, a lot of therapists will take a woman's side just in general,
Okay.
or will take the man's side, or will take somebody's side, which does nobody any good.
No.
And a lot of therapists will come from that perspective I mentioned earlier. It just says, well, you're not happy, why don't you split up? They will kind of go to that much sooner. Or they will encourage them to continue doing things that have just made it worse, not better. So there's, if you look around, you probably know folks like this, most of us do, look around to couples who split up, who went to therapy first.
Yeah.
There's a lot. So the guy's fear is justifiable.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And when the woman can really empathize with that, and she say, "Oh shit, I see what you're saying." It's like, yeah, I'm not surprised you're resisting this. It's like, you're not crazy. Yeah. Let me tell you why I want to do it.
Yeah.
Then the guy might actually listen, because what usually gets the guy to go is when he realizes, I know, if she's saying to him, in effect, look, I know why I can guess why you're afraid of this. But I want to tell you, we're in serious trouble. Yeah. And I don't know what else to do. If we don't do this, I'm worried that we will split up, and I don't want that to happen, and you don't want that to happen, but I'm really unhappy here. When the guy can actually hear that, that's when it will overcome his fear usually, and he'll risk it.
Oh yeah.
And I'm always so respectful of everybody's stance coming in. The woman who was trying to say I had to drag him here, which really pisses me off, and I can understand why she feels that way. And the man who's saying, I didn't want to do this because I'm worried, you're just going to tell us to split up, and I can really appreciate why he's afraid of that. So you kind of start from there, and usually then people are willing to talk to you, because it's like, oh, you're not saying we're idiots.
Yeah. It really does feel like insecurities are kind of that's what would have kept me from going to couples therapy at first, for sure. And that would have stemmed from the lack of self-belief and self-worth, thinking that, oh, now that they're going to find out all these other insecurities that I have, or all these other problems that I have, then it's like, what problems were on the surface and what's underneath is so much worse, whenever in reality, taking a look at what's underneath actually helps resolve the issues up top, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, especially if what you experience is that finding those problems underneath, you still get to consider yourself and be considered a valid human being. A lot of times it's shame. A lot of times what stops people from actually being able to look at what's going on, even the ways that, if I'm being a jerk, and I'm lost in shame, it's very difficult for me to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm being a jerk here. I think I can do better than that, and genuinely apologize and genuinely do better. That's it's so interesting. When I talk to somebody who's involved with 12-step programs, but I'm not personally involved in them, but I have great respect for them. I've learned about them from lots of folks I've worked with. And it's fascinating to me. There's a lot of overlap between how I like to think about this work and how 12-step programs conceptualize things.
Oh yeah, for sure. And while I'm let's see, how do I say this best? Like, I don't frequent the rooms anymore. I'll still go in time to time, but 12 steps did save my life. I owe a lot to it. And I was a huge, and still am a big believer, that if a lot of people were to just implement them like one good time, then their life would start to change a lot, because there's a lot of it's like shadow work, and a lot of like actual, I think it's like some weird therapy that it goes on with the 12 steps, but they don't like to call it therapy because back then it was you're crazy, you go to the loony bin kind of thing. Yeah. And so that's another reason why people don't want to go to therapy, maybe, because then if they say that they're going to therapy, then there's now a label on the outside for other people to see that, oh, now there's something wrong. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. Over the years, and I've been doing it, I've been licensed for 30 years. I was an intern for a while before that. Over that period of time, I think a lot of the stigma has changed, especially more in your generation than in mine. For people who can't see me, I am not a young person. I'm 74 years old. I'm an old guy, so I'm a card-carrying Medicare recipient, by golly. So I'm officially an old guy. And so, it's when I was much younger, I think there was much more of a stigma than there has become in younger generations. Yeah. But even then, and you can tell me, because I'm guessing you probably know more about it than I do. My impression is that for quite a while, 12-step programs tended to be pretty cautious about going to therapy early in recovery. And I can see why, because a lot of the work involved in older forms of psychotherapy would involve doing things that would be pretty dangerous to sobriety, or
Really?
potentially dangerous to sobriety. Yeah, and you know, so there was kind of a mutual distance, let's put it, between, again, some very traditional psychotherapies and what 12-step I think was early on. So I think that has changed a lot. Again, over the 30 years I've been in practice, it's changed a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. I always did kind of wonder why some of the old timers in the rooms would always be a little bit sideways whenever you'd mention therapy or a therapist or something, because they'd always refer to them as quacks or whatnot. Because if they knew what was so good for them, then they would have stopped their drinking before, or so on and so forth. So I never really heard that they were necessarily counterintuitive to each other, but it would actually make a bunch of sense, because the 12 steps is really difficult to go through if you're not actually walked through it with someone, and they've experienced it too. But that's the thing too, is that 12 steps are able to be guided by different sponsors different ways. There's different versions of the 12 steps now. And so everyone can find their cup of tea, if you will, whenever it comes to the 12 steps. So real quick though, whenever you're talking about getting the reluctant guy to go to couples therapy, it sounds like the first thing that we need to address is communication. Or is that something that is actually, like, that should have already been established before, right?
You know, I don't know if you saw the titles of my books and you just teed up that question for me perfectly. And if you did, thank you. And if you didn't, how cool is that? And I'll explain what I just said. So I've written 3 books on these general topics, not counting the statistics book I wrote in the 1980s, but that I'm not counting that one, which is still available, ridiculously still available on Amazon. I can't believe it. But anyway, I've written 3 books in the past, 6 years.
Okay.
And the second one, the title of it is, It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. That's my snarkily titled second book. So why do I say it's not about communication? First of all, let me acknowledge the reason I come up with a silly book title like It's Not About Communication is because the vast majority of couples who come in and they're describing in the first session and more or less what they're doing there use the word communication. They are saying, we're not communicating well. Every time we try to talk about anything, we get into a fight, or we can't talk about certain topics, or, we need to learn how to communicate. That's what they're saying. It's not bizarre. And of course, what you just said totally makes sense, right? Of course, hey, it's about communication, isn't it? So why do I get off and say, no, damn it, it's not about communication? I'll tell you what I mean by that. Because if you go to a therapist, and many, many, many therapists will do this for you, they will teach you how to communicate. They will give you all kinds of skills. They'll teach you systems and skills and practices that will help you, that supposedly will help you communicate better. There's a hilarious send-up of this I just saw on the Four Seasons. Do you know that? I remember the movie from the 1970s, but there was they made a limited series on one of the streaming services. Tina Fey was involved in it. And so she was in it. Anyway, for your listeners who are into that, they did a hilarious send up of one of the main couples, the one that Tina Fey plays the wife in, and her husband went to couples therapy, and they came out with these techniques for if somebody's upset and one says to the other, I need a moment, and they go into their, they go into their stance, and then they have their exchange, and, this is what I'm hearing you saying, and, it's hilarious. The reason I say it's hilarious is that was a mockery of exactly what a lot of people will teach you to do. What I point out to the folks I work with, and what I point out in that book I mentioned, is that huge majority of the folks I work with, they are not having communications problems at all. They are very effective communicators. The problem isn't that they don't know how to communicate. The problem is what they're communicating. What they're communicating often is distrust, anger, contempt, condescension, all kinds of things that they're really effectively communicating. And I could teach you, and you've probably read about them, all the I statements in the world, all the active listening in the world will not hide the fact if somebody has contempt for you. They'll be able to state it in beautiful language, and you'll still pick up, you think I'm a shithead, don't you? Or a moron or something. I hope the language... People communicate that, unfortunately, very clearly. And there's the occasional exception. The
Okay.
occasional exception, somebody, for example, who's on the autistic spectrum, who literally doesn't know how to read the other person's emotions, or maybe not
Yeah.
even their own. That's a
Mhm.
communication problem. That
Yeah.
actually people have to learn some actual skills, and you see when when they have that face on, that means they're happy. When they have that face on, that means they're angry, or
Uh-huh.
they're whatever. People sometimes actually have to learn that.
Yeah,
Vast
yeah, yeah.
majority of people I work with already know that. They've never had to learn it consciously. They learned it already unconsciously. So
Mhm.
they're very effective in how they're
Mhm.
communicating. So that's not the
Okay.
problem. The problem is what they're communicating. And
Huh.
that isn't about learning communication skills. That's
Mhm.
about wondering why are you so pissed off at your partner?
No.
Which is a very different thing. And to
Huh.
actually be able to be honest with yourself and each other, and by honest with each other, I don't mean yelling at each other and being jerks.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean actually calming yourself down enough so that you can say, wow, this is what's bothering me. I think
Mhm.
let's talk about it.
Yeah.
That takes courage. That doesn't take
Mm.
fancy communications techniques. That takes the
Mm-mm.
willingness to tolerate the anxiety
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
intimacy. That's what
Mhm.
that's about. And so, that's my whole idea about, well, it's not really about communication for most people.
Uh-huh.
It's actually about learning about what they're communicating, and then actually figuring out, well, why am I communicating that? And
Mhm.
what else is going on here that we might actually be able to rediscover each other?
Yeah. Okay. Huh. That actually makes a whole lot of sense because if we are communicating in a sense, like you said, we can always tell each other how we're feeling and be well, hopefully be receiving of that. But at the same time, if we're not talking about a good message in the first place, then of course it's going to be met with less positive views on everything, right? So,
Yeah.
here's something for like one thing that my wife and I did because she is on the spectrum and I possibly have ADHD,
Mm.
so it's kind of like we threw together a journal of sorts. So I just created a Google Docs and titled it "It's a Journal for Two Lovers Wanting to Communicate," and we'll throw in like if we're having a hard day, we don't know how to talk to the other person about whatever. We'll throw it in there and we'll let the other person know like, hey, I wrote in there, so you go and read it, and then we can talk about it later, or you can write in response to it and then we can talk about that response.
Mm-hmm.
But that is something that, like you said, was a tool that we did for communication in its own sense. But
Mm-hmm.
as our journal has grown, I think we're at 105 pages now. So as that's gone on, I've been able to tell that the body of what's in the entries has changed. It's not so much I'm feeling you do this and this makes me do this. It's going more along the lines of I'm scared that this is happening,
Mm.
more along the lines
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
and it's if I'm not mistaken, anger is a secondary emotion, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're angry at your partner, then it means that there's something else underneath that is making you feel that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Typically that's true. I lump it all under the general heading of panic, which I realize is overbroad. You know what I mean? That's
That's
that 7 word
perfect.
formula you mentioned: be
Yeah.
kind, don't panic, and have faith. The
Uh-huh.
panic part of that, I mean that very broadly, that
Mhm.
indeed if somebody is angry,
Mhm.
they're probably afraid of something,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
there's some kind of panic going on. And if you kind of lose your shit, it has to do
Mhm.
with that sense of
Yeah.
something's scaring you, or something, you've kind
Yeah.
of clicked over into panic mode, fight or flight or freeze or fawn or whatever it might be.
Uh-huh.
So I have to say, with respect to the journal thing you came up with, I'll tell you what I was hearing as you described it was,
Mm.
it doesn't sound like one of those sort of gimmicky things. It sounds like mutual respect. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It sounds like, yeah, you figured out what works for the two of you. The two of
Mhm.
you figured that out, and you've
Yeah.
been using it. And the
Mhm.
fact that it's been working is just this. And it's interesting how it has shifted so that, yeah,
Uh-huh.
now you're not having to deal so much with the sort of derivative emotions. You're able to just say what you want to say.
Yeah.
And that's what that to me, that speaks of, well, I'll throw in another word here, which is intimacy. That's what I mean by intimacy.
Okay.
Intimacy is when you can actually be present and honest with yourself and each other. And it sounds
Oh.
like that journal has given you a means of making that easier for the two of you.
Yeah. And I think it kind of came about that way because we realized that we were still hurt and we were still dealing with old pains and stuff, and we didn't want to do wrong to the other. And so it was kind of a way of saying like, hey, I don't know how to communicate this, so I'm going to write it out so you can read it. And then it's just kind of evolved, and it hasn't been every time there's an issue, and it hasn't been like every single day kind of thing. If it were that it'd be huge by now, right? But it does help bring about a sense of intimacy, and that's really, I think, part of what a lot of people are missing whenever the panic comes along, right? Would be that intimacy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the causality arrow there points in both directions. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
So yeah, let me explain that. Yeah, in fact, that's the subject of the book I'm working on now. Actually, in general, is start with the idea that to want to be in a couple, to want to stay in a couple. There's a lot of ways of saying this. This is my favorite way. There's two sets of needs you need to fulfill sufficiently.
Okay.
One, and I call one stability, and the other intimacy. And the reason I divide up those two sets is that the skills you need for stability are quite different from the skills you need for intimacy.
Ooh.
So the skills you need for stability are all about more or less not freaking each other out, which is to say, keeping the anxiety level low, avoiding anxiety. Things like, sobriety, for example, is classic there, because the lack of it is incredibly destabilizing. You can't rely on somebody, so it's sobriety is a really important part of stability. Basic sanity, and I say that with great respect for serious mental health issues, but one of the things I will often point out to a couple early on in the first session is with respect to stability, I'll usually say, well, now that we're old buddies because I've known you for 20 minutes, because you see, now I've known you for like half an hour, so we're even older buddies, and I can say this about you too. Obviously, you're not batshit crazy, and I don't, as I say, I don't mean to be, dismissive of serious mental health issues, but I mean psychotic, and it is very, very rare in an outpatient practice that in a couples therapy practice that somebody's going to come in and they're having a psychotic break or a manic episode. It's happened, very rarely over 30 years. But the vast majority of folks I'm working with, no, and they'll usually smile when I say that, and they'll say, "Oh, you haven't seen me in my worst," or whatever. But typically, no, the folks I'm working with aren't crazy, and which is good. I mean, that's a good place to start. So that they're good at stability with respect to that. If they're showing up in an outpatient therapy practice, usually they're, they know how to find a therapist. They're in other words, they're not cognitively impaired typically. Very rare that I would see that. And so and they're not evil. You know what I mean? They're not crazy, evil, or stupid. None of the above.
Big.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, I trust they already know that coming in, but just my starting with that tends to feel like, okay, good. So even when somebody's done something really awful, like cheating or God knows what else, various forms of betrayal. Usually when they're there with me and, as a couple, the one who did it is feeling bad about it. It's rare that they're, occasionally they'll argue about whether something should be considered a betrayal or not. But usually if somebody's cheated and they've owned up to it, they're feeling bad about it. They realize it was wrong. But even then, I'm starting with the assumption they're not crazy, evil, or stupid. So stability is all about all those things are really destabilizing. So they're pretty good at stability starting off. The chief skill of intimacy is quite different. The chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety rather than avoid it. Yeah, I know. And a lot of times people say, wait a minute, I thought intimacy is supposed to feel good, doesn't it? Like if you're having great sex, I don't just mean, when I say intimacy, I don't just mean sex. I mean, it's often included. But I mean, more generally, intimacy is when you are present and honest with yourself and each other. So to do that, and your example of the way you and your wife have worked out that journal is a great example, to do that is risky. Right? Yeah. To be honest, I mean, something as simple as a complaint. You just want to say, hey, I wish you would, put the dishes in the dishwasher or whatever, and something as simple as that. Is, it's not going to be fun for somebody to hear a complaint. And if a couple has had the experience where those conversations have gone off the rails and have been really, really painful, then they will tend to avoid it. Or try and avoid it, or they'll just get really upset because they'll just blow up rather than actually being able to deal with it. So that will tend to lead to some kind of panic. So the chief skill of intimacy is to be able to tolerate that anxiety without crossing over into panic.
Okay.
So, if we go back to my 7 words, the
Mm-hmm.
be kind part is basically how you can be with someone when you're experiencing them as kin.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean by kind, not just
Yeah.
nice, but kin, that sense of,
Yeah.
we may differ on this, but I know we're in it together. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
that kind
Yeah.
of kinship. You can't do that if you're in a panic. If you're in a panic, people
Mm-hmm.
are in fight or flight mode and they're yelling or they're shutting
Mm-hmm.
down or something.
Yeah.
And so that my original formula was only 5 words: be kind and don't panic.
Uh-huh.
But then I realized I started sharing that with folks, and they would say, "Yeah, I get the idea. I see what you mean by that. Yeah, when you're in
Mm-hmm.
panic, you can't really be kind, can you? That's important. We have to
Yeah.
not panic. Tell me, how do
Uh-huh.
we not panic?" They would say. I'd say,
Yeah.
"Well, you got a point there, you know." And so I added the 2 words "have faith," and that's not.
Hmm.
I recognize to say "have faith"
Mm-hmm.
isn't really much of an instruction.
Yeah.
It's more of an observation. The
Okay.
couples that manifested a particular kind of mindset, and I decided to call it faith, but it's not the same as religious faith. It's not
Mm-hmm.
incompatible with religious faith. I know religious
Uh-huh.
folks who can show this kind of faith, but I've known some
Yeah.
religious folks who don't. And vice
Mm-hmm.
versa. I've known some
Oh
non-religious
yeah.
folks who've shown it. I think it overlaps a lot with 12-step. Actually, we'll see what you think.
Okay.
But the faith I'm talking about is a basic mindset that says, you know what, even though this sucks, even though this is painful, even though I can't understand why you did what you did or why I did what I did or whatever, all of
Mm-hmm.
that being true, there's still something right about the whole business. The couples that would come in and show faith would be the ones, like somebody cheats, let's say. They would
Uh-huh.
come in and they would say, this sucks. That's a given.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course it sucks. The
Mm-hmm.
one who did it is feeling bad. The one who was cheated on is feeling angry and hurt and, shock and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if what they're saying is, but we can't just go back to how it was,
Mm-hmm.
because we know, if I think about this person, this partner of mine who cheated, I
Mm-hmm.
know they're not fundamentally evil. I know they're not
Mm-hmm.
crazy.
Yeah.
So there must be something important about it, even though it was wrong.
Mm.
And we better look at that. We better
Yeah.
look at that without freaking out. That's
Mhm.
faith. That's what I mean by faith. It says,
Yeah.
well, we're all doing the best we can here. That's
Mhm.
so when you screw up royally, and I'm not saying we don't screw up, of course we do. But I'm
Yeah.
saying when you screw up, it's you probably weren't crazy.
Mm.
Or even,
Okay.
we're all capable. Yeah, we all do bad stuff, but
Mhm.
occasionally,
Yeah.
not everybody cheats, but we've all
Mhm.
done things. We all done things to hurt people we love. That's the human condition.
Mhm.
We don't mean to usually, but we do.
Yeah.
But a non-crazy, non-evil, non-stupid person can do that. And that's what I mean by faith. That mindset that says reality's right to be what it is. So we
Mhm.
better try and understand it rather than insist that it not be true. The couples
Yeah.
that would come in and say, we just want to go back to how it was. I'll never do that
Mhm.
again. Yeah, good luck. You can't go back to how it was, first of all.
No.
And even wanting to is not helping you.
No.
You're going to have to resolve to learn from this.
Yeah.
And can you imagine the amount of anxiety that takes to hear
Mhm.
your partner who cheated on you
Mhm.
tell you what they were feeling and not want to kill them? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mhm.
Because, it's not surprising. And it's always a tricky thing when you're working
Yeah.
with a couple where there's been infidelity, because the one who was cheated on is very apt to say early on,
Mhm.
what do you mean? What was our relationship like? You're trying to make excuses for him.
Uh-huh.
And it's a
Mm.
thin line between making excuses and saying, no, it's not about excuses. What he did was wrong,
Mhm.
but there was a context that you were both part of, and we better look at that.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
to get to that for both parties, really, but especially for the one who was cheated on, is a
Uh-huh.
leap of faith. It's like, okay, there must be something we better look at.
Yeah. Okay, so I do like that a lot because it does really remind me of the 12 steps in a lot of different ways. So really like step 10, you're sitting there taking a personal inventory at the end of the day, saying like, these are the things where I messed up and this is where I need to make amends, kind of thing, for the next day or by the end of the day. And one of the things that I've always thought that they didn't highlight on was also highlighting the things that they did well, that they did different. And so that kind of would be that same kind of faith, I'm thinking, because there's a goal of doing something different, but at the same time, whenever you're talking about having that person that was cheated on that's definitely easy to pinpoint a betrayal right there, right? So,
Hmm.
what are some of the betrayals that happen whenever it's like it's not so obvious? Because
Yeah.
that is one of the things that sometimes can make people feel even more cheated, right? Because it's maybe not a big event, but it's a bunch of really small things that are adding up over time.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That I do see that sometimes. I have a metaphor I like to use. I'm sure I didn't invent this. I must have heard it somewhere a long time ago. I don't remember who I heard it from, but you'll understand it, I think, right away. I call it the
Uh-huh.
emotional bank account. The
Oh
emotional bank
yeah.
account. Yeah, as soon as I say that, you probably have an idea what I mean. It's like
Uh-huh.
every time you have a pleasant interaction with your partner, you've made a
Mm-hmm.
nice deposit in the emotional bank account and the balance is going up.
Uh-huh.
And it's sort of quantitative. It's funny that it would be quantitative, but it is. And if you got enough in there, you can
Uh-huh.
afford the occasional withdrawal. Now, what's a
Yeah.
withdrawal? But he's a little off and they speak a little sharply or they're a little bit annoyed or whatever, because
Mm-hmm.
annoyance is a given. It's
Yeah.
another thing. My wife and I did a podcast once where we were waiting for a guest,
Uh-huh.
and you can relate to this perhaps if this has ever happened because it's happened to us occasionally. Somebody had a
Uh-huh.
last minute emergency and they
Mm-hmm.
canceled last minute. So we're sitting
Yeah.
there thinking, well, we want to do our podcast, and I said,
Uh-huh.
oh, I know. Let's do a podcast about the one skill that solves all relationship problems. And my wife, being a very intelligent person, looks at me funny and says, "Oh, really? Yeah, right. Because she knows I'm sort of full of it a fair amount. She's very nice that way. Anyway, I said, no, let's do it. So we did. And so, what is
Okay.
my brilliant answer here? It's the one skill that solves all relationship problems is the ability to be
Mm-hmm.
moderately annoyed,
Ooh. Okay.
as opposed to just completely, flying
Yeah.
off the handle. Because,
Uh-huh.
in other words, as opposed to panic. It's the
Uh-huh.
same thing.
Yeah.
It really is the same skill as intimacy. It's the
Uh-huh.
ability to tolerate the anxiety. Because
Uh-huh.
when that emotional bank account is nice and full,
Mm.
then the one constant is that God knows we're all annoying. I mean,
Mm.
everybody's annoying. Right? It's the human condition. There is no
Yeah.
human being, although I always like to point out, my wife needs that skill way more than I do because I'm way more annoying than she is. I'm the
Right
annoying
there
one.
with you.
Yeah,
Right there with you.
and I think that's a good thing, by the way, for guys especially. We
Uh-huh.
should start with that assumption. Our wives will appreciate it. We
Yeah.
are way more annoying than they are. That's we're whatever. Start with that.
Yep. Yeah,
So
yeah.
she needs that. She happens to be very good at that skill. She seems to
Uh-huh.
be able to tolerate my being the annoying person that I often am, and she's nice about it. And why is she
Uh-huh.
nice about it? Because most of the time our interactions are really pleasant and more than
Mm-hmm.
pleasant. They're lovely. So
Yeah.
that means we have a lot of goodwill stored up.
Mm-hmm.
When the reason I like the bank account metaphor is what happens to an actual checking account when it gets overdrawn. First of all, you bounce the check, and so you pissed off the person you wrote the check to, but
Mm-hmm.
also they hit you with an overdraft fee.
Yeah.
So now you're worse off, and that's what happens emotionally if a couple
Oh, yeah.
has nothing in there, if they're just
Uh-huh.
on eggshells all the time and just worried about now what's going to happen,
Uh-huh.
then any little thing, any normal little annoyance, you left the damn dish in the sink again, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, hey, would you mind putting the dish in the dishwasher?
Yeah.
Where if I'm saying that, I'm also saying, and I love the fact that I'm with you, that you
Mm-hmm.
leave the dish in I don't care about the dish in the sink. Yes, I'd like you to put it in the dishwasher. I don't give a shit about it because I love you. We're
Uh-huh.
fine, as opposed to, oh my God, yet another instance of you're not caring about me. That's how people start to think about that. They
Mm-hmm.
will say, oh, you left the dish in the sink. That means you don't care about me. And they will feel
Yeah.
that intensely. And there's the
Mm-hmm.
overdraft fee. So
Mm.
it's worse than it even was. And
Uh-huh.
every little annoyance now becomes more evidence for how messed up they are.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's the death spiral.
Oh.
And so when couples come to see me, they are often heavily into that death spiral.
Okay.
They're just there's part of them that's still what are they seeing a therapist for? Usually they would like to see if they can stay together,
Mm-hmm.
but they're at the point where everything is evidence of how much the other person doesn't like them.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it's really painful. So turning that around often involves a sort of radical understanding
Mm-hmm.
that, no, actually, we're all doing the best we can here, to
Mm-hmm.
understand that pattern. One of the reasons I like to connect that to my outsider's view of 12 step,
Uh-huh.
just the notion of faith it is very similar to the idea in 12 step of a higher power.
Yeah.
It's this recognition that says this I'm not in charge of the universe. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I, the one thing I know is that I can't understand it all.
Yeah.
It is beyond me, but
Mm-hmm.
there's something about it that's basically right.
Yeah.
That's the notion I think of higher power, certainly the way
Mm-hmm.
I like to think about it.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, that really does tie it all in really well because whenever you put it in that case, well, rather in that sense, it really does make me think that a lot of couples don't go because they suddenly had an explosion. Like plenty of them do, I'm sure, and that explosion would be cheating or who knows what else. But like that death spiral is usually something that started real small and never got addressed, and then it just led to something else,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. And I would definitely say that that would be the case in my experience with my first wife. She was saying I needed to go to therapy because one thing or another, and definitely because of the drinking, But while I was in therapy, I was kind of like, I don't know if that would have actually like panned out even whenever I sobered up, or maybe it would have, like, who knows, because the alcohol was making me a totally different person. So I'm sure that a lot of people that go and get couples therapy, do you make sure that they're also like not in addiction of sorts?
I address it in the first session. I ask about it.
Okay.
I don't have any hard and fast rule. Well, I try
Mm.
not to have hard and fast rules about practically anything. I mean, yeah, ethical rules, yes, but
Yeah, yeah.
you know what I mean? But in terms
Uh,
of, because there are folks who will say that. There are folks who say, well, look, if you're still actively using in a problematic way, there's
mm-hmm.
no point doing therapy. You're going to have to get sober first. I
Mm-hmm.
don't say that.
Yeah.
I do observe
Mm.
probably the obvious, that if
Yeah.
somebody is still actively using in a problematic way,
Mm.
I guess by definition, I'm calling it a problematic way. It's like, yeah, get them away,
Yeah, yeah.
and people will often say,
Mm.
there's degrees, obviously. I'm sure you realize this.
Yep.
People will often say, well, because I'll ask, do you have any issues, either one of you, for yourself or your partner, any issues about substance abuse or substance use concerns?
Mm-hmm.
And they will say yes or no or whatever. Often they
Mm-hmm.
will say no, but they will also say, yeah, I do know that when we've been drinking at all, our
Mm.
fights are much worse.
Oh,
Or,
yeah.
we can't hear each other very well. And, they will
Uh-huh.
note, even if they're otherwise, they don't feel like it's really messing up their lives, they will
Mm-hmm.
often note, well, there is that problem that can occur. And
Mm-hmm.
not unusual. So again, I'm not black and white about that. It's
Yeah.
that we'll, we'll include that in the conversation and see where it goes.
Yeah.
But I do make a point of asking about it because sometimes, I'm sure this will surprise you, right? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people are in denial. I'm sure you've never heard that.
Oh.
so
Oh, yeah.
and I mean, sometimes people won't, if I don't ask about it,
Mm-hmm.
I'll find out about it, 3 sessions later. And, oh, by
Yep.
the way, every time we've had these, we're both roaring drunk, or
Yeah.
one of us is, or something like that. It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
gee, have you thought about maybe the alcohol could be part of the problem here?
Yeah.
So that's why I do tend to ask about it right in the first session.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people, if they're in that mindset, it's usually solving another problem for them, and that's why
Yes.
they're using it in the first place.
Yes,
So.
and that statement, yes, indeed. That very statement is another example that I would say that's a statement of faith. That's
Mm-hmm.
saying,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember hearing somebody quoting a speaker from a 12-step meeting.
Mm.
And maybe you've heard something similar to this too. It was some guy who got up at a 12-step meeting. He was very well known in the program. And so he said, the best thing I ever did was give up drinking. Well, you're standing in an AA meeting. What a surprise,
Yeah.
The second best thing I ever did was start drinking.
Oh.
And they
Yeah.
say, what? How can that be? Well, he pointed out exactly what you said. He wasn't crazy to be drinking. I have not met anybody who is crazy to be drinking. I've met lots of people who have serious drinking problems. Like, holy shit, man, this is causing serious difficulties in your life.
Yeah.
But almost none of them were crazy. When I say crazy, I mean, often, even this isn't crazy. People like with untreated schizophrenia or something like that will often be using substances, but they're using them because it dulls the pain,
Yep.
So that's not crazy at all. People use for a reason. Just like people are awful to their spouses for a reason. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just observing most of the time, this is that statement of faith. We're doing the best we can. Even when we screw up, we're doing the best we can on some level. You can look at it afterward and say, well, what do you mean cheating was the best he could do? Of course you could do better than that. Well, of course, it wasn't the right thing to do. But there was a context that probably meant he wasn't like pure evil. It probably isn't. That's another thing. The vast majority of folks I'm working with, I just assume they're not sociopaths. Sociopaths don't usually come to therapy because there's nothing wrong with them, from their perspective. They sometimes are forced into it. I haven't done mandated therapy in many, many years. It was never any fun. To work with people who were required to be there by the court, it wasn't much fun.
Oh yeah, no.
And I don't think it accomplishes much. But the you start with that assumption. It's like, no, even when they do bad stuff, it's like, yeah, there's a context there. There's a way they were talking themselves into it being okay. Doesn't mean it was right.
Yeah.
But that's about faith. That notion that, like you said, that it's not crazy. People are drinking for a reason.
Yep.
And it can obviously cause problems, but nevertheless, it's usually at its root, it's not crazy.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because a lot of people have that shame that's just with the drinking, with substance abuse, because they think that they should be better people because they feel like they have better morals or standards, and yet at the same time, they find them going to a substance to dull pain or any other of these things, and then it's a nasty cycle. It's really terrible. So anyone that's out there struggling, if you're needing couples therapy, definitely do your best to just be honest and open. And that's my biggest thing, is just be honest and open. But real quick, I just looked at the time. This is an amazing conversation. Do you think that we could have you back on? Because I would love to dive even further into couples therapy and all of what it entails with you.
Yeah, I would be happy to come on. I like doing this. So that's why I keep doing it. Yes, I would be delighted to come back on. Let me know, sort of schedule-wise, we'll figure it out. But sure, absolutely.
For sure. And real quick, where can people find you?
Easiest way to find me is my website, which you just put up for those who are watching the video. BruceChalmer.com. If you spell my name right, you'll get it. BruceChalmer, BruceChalmer.com. That has information about my practice, about my books. I have a coaching practice I can do. It's all by tell-all nowadays. And also about my books. And the podcast that we mentioned that I do with my wife, Judy Alexander, is Couples Therapy in 7 Words, available anywhere you can get podcasts. And we have a podcast website, which is ctn7.com, CTN, the number 7, ctn7.com. That's just shorthand for Couples Therapy in 7 Words. So that's another one that you can go to and see all of our podcast episodes are there. We now have 200, I think it's up to 217 episodes now, something like that.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive. I did stop by there to listen real quick, and I was like, oh, hey, they've got a lot of episodes.
We do. We've been doing it for 5 years. It started because the first of those 3 books I mentioned, which was called Reigniting the Spark, came out on February 29th, 2020. Well, guess what was happening on February 29th, 2020? Right after that, everything shut down. So we couldn't do any sort of in-person signing events. So we did a Facebook Live book launch and had a lot of fun doing it. And I asked my wife to be part of it because she's great with that stuff. And she also is very good at being, looks like I'm the therapist and she's the real person. She's very good at when I start to nerd out, it's kind of bringing me back to, something that regular people would actually want to hear. So we decided to do a podcast together, and we've been doing it ever since.
Nice. That's really awesome. I've been trying to get my wife to hop on the podcast with me, and she's just like, not yet, not until I get my book published. And I'm like, okay.
What's her book? Give a shout out for what you're writing about.
So she's doing a fantasy novel of sorts, dealing with a character that has a lot of PTSD. So she's tying mental health wellness into it. So
that's a great idea. Wow.
Yeah. So if we can expect you on in the future, do you think that we can play a little game real quick?
Absolutely. Feel free.
Alrighty. So our little game show today is called Fix the Formula. So I've got 3 twisted versions of your 7-word formula, and I just need you to correct it or critique them and let me know why they don't work and what couples really need. So, first one, be calm, don't fight, and have goals.
I don't think I would say that's bad. You know, be calm, don't fight, and have goals. I mean, I can be picky, I suppose. Be calm isn't necessarily the same as don't panic, because I talk about, no, sometimes it's not about being calm, it's about tolerating the anxiety without panicking.
Yeah.
And don't fight. Yeah, don't fight nasty. But sometimes people have to disagree because you're two human
Yeah.
beings, you know. But I mean, don't fight isn't bad, because if fighting is implying nasty, then absolutely don't fight. You know, that's a fighting is when you're in a panic. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And have goals is interesting, because have goals, but don't be too married to them, because they keep shifting.
Yeah. Ooh.
You know, so that's the interesting, because there's a lot of therapists will say, well, what are your goals for this work? I actually start out, my favorite opening question with folks is, how will you know if this is helping?
Ooh.
And the reason I do that is right from the get-go, they are focused. I'm inviting them to focus on, hey, you guys have to decide if this is helping you. I'm not saying you'll know yet. You know, how will you know? You may not, you probably won't know immediately. And probably what you think your goals are will shift over time, because that's what happens, and that's fine. So, there's my little critique of that. It's like, have goals, but don't take them too seriously. But look, don't take what I'm saying too seriously either. Remember, I said that the subtitle of that second book was Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. And I mentioned in one of the last chapters in that book, by the way, that applies to me too. Everything I know about couples therapy is wrong too. It's the knowing. If you think you know, see, that's what I really mean by that. It's like, if you think you have the last word on it, you're wrong. Yep. And me too. So am I.
Yeah, very much in line with the more you know that you don't know.
Absolutely.
What you don't know.
Right on. Yep, that is true. Yeah.
All right. And number 2, be nice, avoid conflict, and have boundaries.
Well, be nice. You have to be a little careful with, because being kind isn't always nice.
Yeah.
Being kind sometimes is telling something to someone that you're pretty sure they won't want to hear. Be respectful, absolutely.
Yeah.
Be respectful, but sometimes not nice. I mean, it depends on what you mean by nice. So, there's my quibble with that one. And I'm sorry, what was the second part? Was
avoid conflict.
Avoid conflict. Well, good luck with that. because you can't. Sure, try. Good luck. Well, in fact, I have a whole section, what I call the death spiral for passion, where it's basically about people trying to avoid conflict because it doesn't go well, and then they end up shutting down intimacy, because they're afraid to actually talk to each other. So avoid conflict. Yeah, I'd be careful with that one. And have boundaries.
Have boundaries. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, boundaries is one of those words I do tend to. It's a little trendy, It's a little like, you're violating my boundaries. Okay. I just would be, I would be. You know what it's like? What it reminds me of? The concept of microaggressions. Do you know that concept? Yeah. I know the concept too. The concept is founded, I think, in very humane thoughts. It's meant to point out the ways that people can really be, death by 1,000 cuts. Do you know what I mean? I get that. Having said that, there is a way it's played out where people become so exquisitely sensitive to anything that's insensitive, a little bit, because we're all jerks a little occasionally, that then that becomes the issue, as opposed to somebody just being able to talk about it and not freak out. So it's, it's similar to trigger warnings, which again is founded in the whole notion of being humane. Yes, warn somebody if they have PTSD, of course. I used to treat lots of folks with PTSD. Before I did a lot of couples work, I was doing some couples work, but I was doing lots of working with people with trauma. And that, when they would be trigger warnings, the problem is, if you avoid the triggers, you're not helping yourself. You're just making yourself more sensitive to them. So it's stuff like that. It's like, there's always a double meaning. So boundaries is one of those words. It's like, oh, when I hear it, I cringe a little bit, because somebody's using it in a very, this means I get to say this and you don't get to question it. And it's like, everybody calm down. That's sort of my solution to it all. Everybody calm down, which is a terrible formula, by the way, but that's kind of where I'm starting.
Don't tell them.
Yeah, I don't tell them.
Yeah, they'd get more angry.
They would, for good reason. It's a stupid thing to say, but that's, part of me is thinking, if we all just calm down here, we can talk about this. Don't panic. It's really don't panic.
Yeah, and I love how you brought up the whole trigger warning thing, because I'm a firm believer that if you declare a safe space, and try to avoid triggers or try to avoid things that are going to upset people, you're going to create another instance where people are afraid of sharing anything because then they don't know what's going to happen. And therefore, you actually just perpetuate their problem further.
Yeah.
So.
It also has the unfortunate side effect of turning people into assholes.
Yeah. Ooh.
You know, that which is it's ironic because it's coming from a place that says we don't want people to be assholes. So we'll make a rule that you can't be an asshole here. And if I make that rule, I have just become an asshole.
Yep.
And so I love those ironies. I'm a sucker for good irony, I have to say.
Yeah. Oh man. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. And last up, number 3, be generous, don't overthink, and have chemistry.
I like that. That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not saying exactly the same stuff, but I like that. Be generous. What's wrong with that? That's lovely. Be generous. Don't overthink is beautiful. That's actually incredibly similar to don't panic. It's pretty much the same thing as don't panic. You know what I mean? Overthinking is like kind of what I call in panic, you know?
Yeah.
And well, what was the last one again?
Have chemistry.
Have chemistry. Yeah. You can't do that on purpose, or maybe you can. I don't know. But chemistry turns out to be chemistry is lovely. It's important. You know.
Yeah.
You can't control it. It's not as black and white as people think. Mm-hmm. I remember reading some research, especially for women, apparently, especially for heterosexual women, that if there's too much chemistry early on when they're first meeting a guy, they can be badly misled. So it's not that chemistry isn't good, but too much too soon can be so distracting that you miss all the red flags.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, but chemistry. But I'm a fan of chemistry, so you know it's good. It's good when you got it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I like that. That's cool.
Well, I love that. Yeah. Thank you for playing our new game, Fix the Formula, and you have earned the honorary title of the Faithful Faith Bringer. So,
well, I am honored.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Of course. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you on, Dr. Bruce Chalmer. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation because I'm excited to see what we can dive into with couples therapy, because I know I've learned a lot and I've got even more questions. There is one last question I have for you. So, Dr. Bruce Chalmer, the name of this podcast is Retrieving Sanity, and we explore how all facets of living life impact mental health. Looking at the incredible motley adventures of your life, what does retrieving sanity personally mean to you today, and what's one practice or perspective you believe is crucial for anyone on that journey?
Oh, wow. Great question. You know, something about being able to laugh at the absurdities, I think has a lot to do with it. I said a little while ago, I'm a sucker for good irony, you know, and I don't mean that. I don't mean to laugh at the absurdities in a way that's like, you know, uncaring of someone who's genuinely feeling pain. I work with lots of folks in pain, but it's amazing. Even in the midst of all their pain, they will sometimes laugh at, you know, when we're talking about a lot of this stuff, they'll recognize, there is some absurdity here. So I think the willingness to appreciate the contradictions. What I was just writing about actually in the book I'm working on now is I'm calling that the skill from which all the other skills flow in relationships, is the ability to hold contradictory understandings at the same time. We all have mixed feelings, and some of them are kind of hilarious and how opposite they are. Yeah. And if you can appreciate the absurdity, then life is kind of an interesting dance instead of just a slog.
Okay, I love that. I'm going to have to definitely analyze my own thoughts a little bit more to see how many contradicting beliefs I have within myself. So, all right, Dr. Bruce Chalmer, I thank you very much for being on the show, and everyone out there, thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity on WDJY 99.1 FM. And as always, much love to yourself if you can. Love others if you can, but you got to love yourself first before you can really love others sometimes. But be kind. And as Dr. Bruce would like to say, what's your 7 words for everyone again? Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. Thank you, sir. Everyone out there, y'all have a good night, and we'll see y'all next week. Shalom.